everybody. It is 8:30. We're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm pleased to introduce Bob Seymour from the University of Maine and also the 2020 Maine Tree Farmer of the Year. He's going to talk to us about his ecological silviculture practices on his property here in Maine.
Well, thank you. Great to talk to a bunch of fellow tree farmers. I spent my career as a silviculture professor at the university. I taught there for over 30 years. There's at least one of my students in the audience here practicing forestry now, so that's great. My wife is Jessica Leahy, is also on the forestry faculty, and we, about 12 years ago, and then I was still working then. I retired at 17. We decided to get some skin in the game and practice what we teach, right? So we bought some land. This was 10 years ago, and several different woodlots. We now own about 700 acres throughout Maine. Let's see, and most of that land had no history of management on it. So we were just starting fresh, which was okay. This property I'm going to talk to you today is a huge exception to that. It's been managed now for 57 years by ecologically minded foresters, us in the last 9 years before this, a fellow named Ron Locke, which we'll see. So, and it's also got extraordinary documentation as this is unfolded. So we'll go from here. Let's see here. What are we going to do? Here. Oh, it's not the forward advance. I go to the mouse. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Yeah. People, latecomers here. There's always find a seat here. There's a couple in front. Okay, standard. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of this property, which is pretty interesting. I'll talk about the silviculture that created this legacy. I'm going to talk about, you're going to see three sort of measures of performance here: the sustainability and for forest products, the financial returns, and then the carbon storage. And then we will go to some conclusions. I write it since about 5 years ago now. I've been writing a column for Maine Woodlands, which is the newsletter, the monthly newsletter of the Maine Woodland Owners Association, which is a great organization. It's about silviculture mostly, and it just turns out that I'm writing a 3-part series. You're going to get the PowerPoint version of these 3 articles. So if you could probably access this from somehow. It's really, I guess the newsletter is only open to members, but so this will be written up. And you can get to it. Wicopy Woods, the star there, is actually dead center in the state of Maine, right? I mean, if you did the geographic center of Maine, you'd be right there in the town of Speck. It's named, the Wicopy is the Wabanaki name, the native name for the leatherwood shrub, which is pretty rare actually in the woods. You find it, but it's mostly limited to really high site northern hardwoods, rich places that were never an ag. So there's quite an abundant population here that's extraordinary. So the previous owner named it for that, if you want to know where the name comes. Now, the story arc here is really, for most of the early part, all of the early part, was about this fellow on the left, Ron Locke, who's he's a legendary forester here, who bought this land in 1968 with his wife, and owned it until 2015 when he sold it to us. He moved away in 2006 to New York and sold the house and some frontage, kept the woodlot. His mission was really, he was a forester, just sort of really hands-on, was well known in the sort of low impact community, all of that. Worked as a consulting forester much of his career. His mission was to take this old rundown farm, high-graded woodlands, and make it into a really productive place. And there's no question he succeeded at that. So he was an exceptional land steward, but he also kept meticulous, detailed records. So we're going to see the benefit of that here today. Me being an academic, of course. In fact, we had the closing, right in Orono. Ron came and he had 4 boxes, file boxes of all of his records, as well as his consultant, who had another box. So we went through we signed the papers and we went back to our house. My wife called this, we had this open adoption where we went through it. We spent hours going through all these old records so we knew what we had, and it was wonderful. Very emotional, actually, of course, for him parting with this land, but he's been happy. Now, we're forest scientists, right? Jess and I. I'm a silviculture researcher and teacher. We thought we'd landed in forester's heaven here. I mean, this is my own little research forest I now had, right? After I always wanted this, right? And this had all these backgrounds, and we, of course, have sort of piled onto that. And we certainly made our mark on top of Ron's 36-year legacy, I guess. And I guess the way we talk about it is when you get dealt all the high cards, like we were here, you need to play your hand carefully, right? You don't want to screw this up, in other words. So, and I think we've done that. I mean, we have some witnesses in the room who could testify to this or not. We've had like 2015 when we bought this, we've had 26 tours, numerous articles. You're seeing the benefits of it here. Thank you for coming. This is another great opportunity to share what I think is a great story here. Again, tree farmer, we were awarded Tree Farmer of the Year in 2020, which of course is a great honor. So just repeats here, long record of monitoring stewardship by ecological foresters. This actually is won the outstanding tree farm twice. Once when Ron, early in his tenure in 1984, was so awarded. I doubt if there's another example. It's been in the system more than 50 years, Tree Farm. We got our 50-year signs out there now. The Forest Stewards Guild has a model forest program. It's one of only 2 of those in the state, and it's a nice piece of property. It's productive soils. As I say, we got it from Ron 10 years ago now, but it had, because he moved away 10 years prior to that, it had no activity for quite a while. So there's just a type map, aerial photo of it. That's 21 imagery, 4 years after the harvest, and it's typical upland mixed wood. Sort of central Maine forest type. There's the northern hardwood mixtures with things like cedar, fir, some spruce, sugar maple mostly. It's on a drumlin. We subsequently bought 220 acres north of this, which hasn't been treated like this land was. Much heavier harvest, but it's good land. And you can see that whole piece of property. If you know what a drumlin is, it's sort of a hilly glacial formation. All of Maine is glaciated. We've got the sort of the southwestern face of this drumlin here, this hill. Wonderful soils, actually, glacial tills, very deep, will grow good hardwood stands. In 1942, which is our first aerial photos, you can see that it's this lower part here of the property. You can see there's about, of the original 100 acres he bought, 15 or so were in fields, right? This is like this classic story, at least in the eastern US, of forest reversion. A lot of that land probably reverted prior to that. Probably 80% of this land was cleared in the peak of ag, and which around there was about 1870 or 80, probably the peak clearing, a lot of sheep farming. Ron Locke, being a forester, of course, he was not a farmer. He didn't need fields, so he let most of them revert, but also being a forester, he had to have his plantation, right? So out there, the first year, afterwards, the first spring, he goes out there with a colleague, and in one morning, they machine planted 5 acres with 3-0 bare root stock. We still had a state nursery then. And 47 years later, here we are. This is where we first started paying attention, because this was pretty remarkable. We cruised this. 50 cords of wood standing there in 47 years. So that's a mean annual increment of over a cord per acre per year. Really good land. Site index is like off the chart for white pine. Of course, these are the most recently abandoned fields, the best land on the property, but in general, this is a good place to grow trees, no question. Now, Ron was a hands-on guy. He cut about 50 cords a year himself with low impact machinery. You can get a sense of the products here that we grow and sell. I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of spruce fir pulp. we had better markets for it back then than we do now, but we can still sell it. There's spruce fir saw logs, a lot of low-grade hardwood, both for pulpwood and fuel wood, for both his own use and sold. There's some aspen products that went for wafer board, probably some cedar logs, white pine logs, white birch boltwood is a big, he had a lot of that. That's a valuable product up here. But you can see most of that, if you look at it carefully, 2/3 of that's low-grade wood, right? He was mostly just doing improvement cuttings, right? And, you know, picking his saw logs up when he could. This is a shot probably from the 80s. He would put, this is back when you could still sell 4-foot wood roadside. So he just put that up. He'd go to work, spend like a month, maybe operating himself during the year. 40, 50 cords, as I mentioned. He would also cut some, you know, if he came fir and spruce, white spruce saw logs, he would put them out. And then, so that's what logging was like. That went on till, what, the 90s probably, till you couldn't sell 4-foot anymore. The silviculture here is what I would now call irregular shelterwood. There's sort of 3 variants of that. We don't need to get into that. It's basically a natural regeneration system based on native long-lived species. So you have sort of a continuous presence, if you will, of mature trees always. It's not like single tree selection, though. You always have areas under regeneration. They kind of come and go, usually the minority of the stand area, small gaps, sunlit understories. Again, this is shelterwood. You have the irregular canopy. So this is not in any sense even-aged silviculture. Diverse structure, diverse species are the hallmarks here. So we have complexity within the natural limits, not contrived, but not simplification. Now, Angela, when she first asked me to speak about this, why don't you come and talk about adaptive silviculture? Okay. I mean, it's become a bit of a buzzword. And I said, I could do that, but why don't you just talk about a specific example where it's been applied for 55 years and we'll see how this works. If you haven't encountered adaptive silviculture, it's this climate thing. It's like three great minds got together and decided, you know, you got 3 options here when you're facing an uncertain climate world ahead of you. Resistance, resilience, transition. Resistance is all of your silviculture management aims to keep what you already have, right? You're just holding on, you're holding the line. And that's appropriate in some cases. Resilience is diversify what you have, both structurally, maybe compositionally, but mostly working with the native forest, just covering your bets a little bit. Transition is, okay, no, we need to move to something new and novel, right? So that is that's the last ditch effort, really, if you got species that are just ill adapted. I don't think we're in that situation. 80 to 90% of what we do and what Ron did before us we'd call resilience. We didn't really call it that when we started, but that's what we're doing, right? We're right in the middle. We have, I think 4% of the lot is in reserves, and they're mostly little patches of nice big old sugar maple trees and a riparian strip, right, where we don't harvest. But over 95% of this is under management. And it's right there under that resilience strategy with this irregular shelterwood. So it's a multi-age system that relies primarily on advanced regeneration, right? Partial shade. That's the way our species work up here, by and large, at least the long-lived ones. It maintains this diverse canopy structure. That's where the irregular comes in, height and age. Implemented by tree marking, right? Boots on the ground forestry here, if you're doing it well. And the species, this is the key concept, that mature at different ages, right? You have this concept, what I've come to call 2 rotation, even 3 rotation species. For example, here's a nice northern hardwood stand where we have just partially harvested 2 years before that picture probably, 7-inch yellow birch, 8-inch sugar maple. Those are small, solid boltwood trees, high quality. Those things are about 80 years old. We have just harvested the 1 rotation trees out of this mix, the aspen, the white birch, and the fir, right? The ones that mature in 50 to 60 years. And if you just clear cut that and regenerated it, that's all you'd have back. You'd lose these valuable species. So you really have to manage them on longer rotations. But if you don't have that earlier entry, you're going to lose the value in those short-lived ones. And this can go on. Things like cedar, hemlock will have probably 3 rotations, right? Even white pine will live a long time. It's just, most of them are like this, okay? So it's an important idea. It's another example of the components of these irregular structures. Sometimes you have these large legacy trees, sometimes which you never harvest in a stand. We always keep a few of those. You have the dominant trees are the growing stock, which are the, making you your money and providing the shelter wood, overwood. You have tall regeneration, which have been in the shade a long time. A lot of our shade tolerant species will do this, and that's their nature, and they will grow well after being suppressed for a long time. And then finally, of course, you always have to have new regeneration. This is the essence of sustainability. So that's what this looks like. Under our ownership, now we took over and we bought late 15. We spent a whole year working up a timber sale that was over 1,700 cords on the whole 128-acre footprint here. We laid this out ourselves, marked it all, Jess and I, and we were mostly after imminent mortality of those shorter lived species. We noticed because it hadn't been in activity for almost 15 years, really, a lot of white spruce, birch dying. We also wanted to reduce the stocking of the unacceptable growing stock, the UGGs, and start some regeneration, which had not been focused. There was no focus at all. I don't think the word carbon ever came up. But we'll discuss what happened. Now, the overstory was great, pretty well stocked, but Jess pointed out, Bob, if you look down, the understory is all beech and fir, right? Ron really just was picking away at the overstory. That can be a legacy of just light harvesting without any other attention. So we got a bunch of NRCS money. I'm a silviculture. We know how to get to do this, and you'll see the examples here in a minute. All tree marked, probably took us, he marked about 10 acres a day, I guess. And so it took a while to get this done and set up and trails laid out. Contracted with Prentice and Carlisle. They are a management company, but they run equipment too. They have this wonderful Ponzi cut-to-length systems, a couple of them. Back then it was the Ergo. Now you would get the Scorpion King, cut-to-length, long reach, 34 feet reach. We call this low impact harvesting with high impact equipment, right? Ron uses little tractors. He had a bulldozer. We don't live on the land. We have no ability to cut 1,700 cords in 2 months, right? That's a different system. So they came in middle of September, operated until Thanksgiving. About 9 weeks, they had to break down. 200 cords a week kind of production. That's not super high, but it's okay. They'll make money at that price. All the residues left in the woods. We're sticklers for laying out the trails and keeping them wide apart and narrow, right? 80-foot spacing, 12 feet trails. So 15%, no more. You notice that aerial photo earlier. 3 years after the harvest, you can't find a single trail, right? And yet the whole thing was networked. Everything was operated on an 80-foot spacing. So this sweating the details. Now this machine will only cut 26, 27 inch on the stump. So we had one pine stand, had some really large, oversized. I mean, not necessarily in a growing stock sense, but the mills now, there's 2 of the 3 pine mills we sell to only can saw up to about 36. And so you don't want to get into trimming off the stumps and stuff. So they brought in a hand crew. One faller came in and worked about a day and a half and cut about 30 large pine trees. It's a great system, actually slaughtering these big pine trees, bucking them up old style, when he still got the forwarder around. He had no skidder, which was kind of a struggle for him because he couldn't push his trees over. He had to actually fell them with wedges, but he was highly skilled. So we took a couple of loads of pine, 10,000 feet or so, wheeler loads of there. Nice wood, of course, that made some money. Now I'm going to show you just briefly the silviculture that we've done, and there's more to this. This could be a day-long lecture, of course, from a professor. One thing that we've noticed, and this should be a practice way more widely applied up here than it is spraying beech stumps after you cut them. That prevents them from suckering. That way, if you do that, you don't have this big problem of beech building up in the understory. That's a big deal up here in New England. You just go out there and you put some dye in your herbicide, spray the stumps. This goes really fast. Now, many of you probably haven't seen this. A lot of what we do hands-on involves cutting small trees, right? And there's just many ways to do that. Most people go out there with a little electric chainsaw or something. Well, about 10 years ago, about 12 actually, we discovered this backpack chainsaw, the Husqvarna FBX 535. Now, newsflash here, you cannot buy these in the United States, so don't go down to your Husky dealer and ask him for this. They'll look at you funny. You can get them, though, from Europe. When we first bought one, we got it from Canada. Husqvarna stopped importing them there, so now you have to get them directly from Sweden. If you want to pursue this, you go to my YouTube channel. I have a whole playlist about this machine, and it is just amazing. Extraordinary thing about it, basically, it's got that, it's just a saw at the end of a pole, right, running off like a brush saw 30cc motor, but it's all of the weight is suspended on that bar. So you walk around and you literally have nothing on your arms. So you can, even, I'm an old man. Now, the thing, I gotta admit, something's gone on here. This machine is heavier than it was 10 years ago, right? But it's still, everything is heavier than it was. This is the old, our old joke that when I was teaching, right, the students get younger every year. It's the same kind of phenomenon. So, but it's an amazing ergonomically efficient tool. Not just for this, for boundary lines, it has all kinds of uses, and you can get one, and I've probably a dozen of these in Maine. I've promoted these, and people, landowners are buying them, using them. Great tool. Here's one example of it where we go through and saw off the beech understory. You can cut about 250 trees an hour with this. I can as an old man, and then just comes behind with the spray bottle and sprays the stumps. You go, that'll treat about a half acre an hour. We had about 500 of these stems per acre. And that's done, right? That beech gone from a serious problem. The reason we do this, of course, is to eliminate that low shade layer, right? Which is gonna lethal. You'll never get anything established underneath that. I don't have a pre-harvest picture, but if that beech was still there, you just have nothing but dense shade on the forest floor. But you want to maintain the high shade because that's what our species need to regenerate, the seed source. And if you're patient, even a few years later, along comes the sugar maple. So this, that wouldn't be there. It might come in and live 1 year into the beech and then die. Here it is flourishing. We did have one, like 5 acres, it was too small to operate. It was a dense, mostly wide ash stand, almost 50 years old, but it was so overstocked that it had almost no merchantable wood. So we got an NRCS contract and did a crop tree release, hands-on. Now this we did with chainsaws because the wood was up to 8 inches, and we did take some firewood, but not much. Very heavy removal. I mean, we literally cut 90% of the stems and left the tree every 20 feet, and that looks open. But now if you go back 7 years later, that thing is closed right in. This is good soil. This has worked like a champ. The only problem, of course, is it's mostly ash. We've done enrichment planting and this is where we're pushing the resilience, right? We're trying to augment species that are mostly south of us. Red oak is a great example of it there. Red oak is native to that part of Maine, but it is not common in the woods. Some places you'll find it. We're trying to bring that in along with these northern hardwoods. So we plant that, put them in tubes, et cetera, protect them from the deer. This is, of course, expensive. NRCS helped us with that too. We also plant white pine, Maine state tree, which grows really well. It'll grow really fast, but then in the open, it will get attacked by the pine weevil. So we actually do what most people don't do. We spray the terminals every year with insecticide. You only need to do this for about 4 years. They grow 3 feet, and pretty soon they're up one log. You have to get a long wand sprayer. This all works really well. And we've got some beautiful pine stands. And this pine, of course, is just ideally climate adapted. And it's pine and red oak are some of the most valuable things we can grow, especially if they're quality. So this is a twofer. So they get up there really quick. And then, of course, like everybody else, we've got invasives. You can't, in this case, it's mostly honeysuckle. We're out there spraying that, mostly foliar, some cut stumps work, the bigger bushes, but it's mostly foliar. That's stone dead. But if you don't do that, it just takes over the understory, right? It's not a huge problem, but we've dealt with it. Okay, so that, I mean, again, I could go on more, but so we have this nice woodlot now, right? It's beautiful to walk around in and hunt deer and everything else. What's been the benefit of it, though? What's the bottom line of this? That's just why we're here, right? So I'm going to show you. Now, this is, I could spend the whole time on this slide because this is, if you'll see in a minute. So we're going to look at the standing inventory over 47-year period. I mean, how often can we actually do that with confidence on a lot this size? There's the growing stock. That's about 2,000 cords on the original 85 acres before those fields reverted, okay? You notice that's stable, right? All those fields grew in, the pine grew in. Ron bought another 25 acres, so now we're up to, if you minus the frontage sold off, so you're up to 128 acres now. That is since 1998, that's been inventory too, so I just kept them separate here. So that dark blue line is the standing timber. You can see the dip here is our harvest in 2017 that we did. Now, you just stop and think about this, right? This is why this is such a great place, right, for us who scientists who into documenting the benefits of this kind of forestry. I sort of added up how long it took us. We put in permanent plots actually here, so we've got even better records. But if Ron inventoried that land 4 times himself, it takes a lot of time to, work up the data and all that stuff. I asked about 100 days. There's probably $300,000, sorry, $30,000 of or more effort in that at today's prices and foresters just to get these data you're looking at here. So no harvesting then. That's why the growing stock built up temporarily. We took it back down because, for the reasons we explained, we purchased it right there. Now, all right, so what? We got what's interesting about this, if anything, right? We got just a flat line. Okay, big deal. Well, so think about this. You should all know this is a managed forest. And if we do we want that line to be flat, or don't we want that to grow up and build up growing stock over time? Well, it depends on where you start. If you're way down low, yes, but if you're already well stocked, no, the answer is probably no, right? You want to keep that stocking at that sweet spot level by balancing what? Growth versus harvest, right? And when you do that, you will have a more or less constant inventory. So this in a sense is an indicator that this land has been managed sustainably, right? So the benefit is what? The benefit is the harvest. The harvest, then, if we start accumulating that over time, so the differences between first the green line and then the blue line, between that top black line, that's the total yield of this strategy. So the standing timber plus the wood that's not there anymore, that's gone to the market. That turns out to be what? 3,650 some cords. That is so in the 47 years here, we've cut 1.8 times, Ron and us, we're about equal actually, the inventory when we started, okay? So we've run through the original inventory almost twice. And yet we've got the inventory now is quite a bit higher than it was when we started, right? So that's another good news story. Part of it was more land, but it's just higher, right? Well, sorry. If you just take the difference in the first inventory, this inventory, and add the harvest, you get essentially the long-term growth, right? How often do we have this for a small woodlot? It's almost 7/10 of a cord, right? So now you will grow more than that pine plantation example. You put in a conifer plantation, you'll grow more than that in a production high yield situation. But for a managed mixed species forest like this, especially that has just a nice mixture, that's a high number, right? It's probably twice, at least 1.5 times the average for the state of Maine, and I'm sure higher than what most investors are getting on their more industrial managed lands in the north. So that is very reassuring. Okay, species, just a little window into how the forest has changed. So it's been sustainable in a volume sense, right? But the forest has changed in a very positive way. If you look from the bottom, we got the species in order, and these are ranked from the most abundant to the least abundant now in the current forest. So you got sugar maple in the orange, the red maple is red, beech is the gray, yellow birch is yellow. The next bar is a stippled bar is white ash, which wasn't even there in the beginning. The blue is cedar and the white is white pine, right? That's 90 or 85 or something % of our growing stock now are those species, all worth money, all long-lived. And you can see that the big drop from the original harvest, when Ron's first inventory in 1978, 40% of the wood was white spruce, paper birch, larch, tamarack, and balsam fir, right? All short-lived, valuable species, actually, maybe not the larch so much. And you can see we went from that 40% down to maybe 5% over by steadily going after those species, right? And they were timing out. Those species are a legacy of the old agricultural abandonment prior to even that photo was taken back around 1900. They're now gone. And because we now have, these are all native species, long lived, pretty well adapted to the even warming climate. White spruce, paper birch are boreal species. You know, we don't want to be growing them. And white spruce went from healthy, I think, when Ron bought that land, to the few that we have left that do not look well, and they're just not thriving. So red spruce would be a different story. There's very little on this property. All right, that's the volume, harvest story. Let's look at the money. Okay. When you do these things, you got to keep the stumpage in constant dollars, right, over time, just because of inflation. So we're using the year 2017 prices because that's when we had a big contract for all this stuff. So we can be confident what it was paid. And then in the past, harvest weight in the past, you need to compound forward just like an investment, right? And we're going to use just 2% here to be conservative. So it's the same time graph, starting in 1968 when Ron bought the property. We're going to look at on the left axis is the total value of the land, and the right axis is that same number per acre divided by the acreage. If you add up all the harvests, right, during Ron's period, I did this by decade. He actually cut every year, of course, just for simplicity. I did 3 decades. That's why that jumps. And then, of course, those are in the past, so they're going to be growing that revenue as you compound it forward, just like a savings account. Then here's our big harvest. That's also compounding a little bit. You will come out after that wood that we saw that was at 3,600 cords has produced $200,000 and more, a little bit of revenue in 2024 dollars today, right? Compounded to that time. If you add to that, flipped up the thing there, the current growing stock, which is about 125K, we now have $331,000 of an asset value. Now, notice only a third of that's actually out there standing. The rest of this is history. Ron cashed a lot of that in, and then we took it here too. So this is the unbelievable part of the story. So he bought this land, 100 acres, house, barn, outbuildings, for $6,000 in 1968. So he had to borrow money, young couple. They came in, they appraised the buildings, came up with $5,000, and they just subtracted that from the $6,000 purchase, ended up with $1,000 value on 100 acres, $10 an acre. And back, you know, a lot of this was old fields reverting, and nobody, you know, that back then, it was hard to believe that this was true. Wasn't around then, but it was hard to give away land then sometimes. I mean, $10 was still a bargain though. So the real question is, what interest rate then equates those two? $10 in 1968 compounds to what? 331,000 well, it's per acre, it'd be $2,600 per acre. The answer is 10.5% nominal return on that $10 investment. How about that? Over 56 years. Now, inflation during that period, if you look at the consumer price indexes, it's about 4% over that long period. You have to subtract that from the nominal rate, but then what you're left with is a 6.5% real rate of return on that investment. Now, if you go out now, I shared this, I have these readers that are financial wizards, and whenever I write a column that has money in it, they send me an email. So I sent this to him in advance. I said, Denny, this can't be true, right? This is like almost too good to be true. He says, well, it's buy low, sell high. You know, that's always been a good axiom. He went back and ran it on his own, a much more sophisticated financial analysis software, and got even a higher. Now, but then also, I think $10, so you can look, so if that was true, inflation's been about 9 times in that time. So if that was true, we could go around Quebec, Maine and buy all kinds of land for $90 an acre. That's not the way it is. We did buy, the piece we bought north of us was $500 an acre, which is nice land with no access, right? And cut over. So that's mostly bare land, some wood on it, not much. If you discount that back, right, so we're taking today's land value, go backwards, what would that be? $55 an acre. That's probably a realistic value then for what you could buy land for. I moved to Maine in the late 70s. I bought it for bunch of it for a little bit under 100. So that's probably right. If you do that, if you use that 55, you still get 7.3% return, real 3.3, 7 nominal, 3.3 real. So this is the real deal, right? This shows that, and if you can, the best comparable investment, he says, are TIPS, they call it treasury inflation protected securities, right? Right now, you can get a 10-year certificate for 1.7%. It's like a bond, right? That's it. So that's the comparable thing. That's only a 10-year investment. This is a 50, go try to buy a 50-year investment and get 3% real. You cannot do it unless you're going to buy good land and manage it well. That's the lesson here. All right. Just briefly, this just shows, so that's the overall, look at the overall performance here. This is the value of individual stands per acre, the residual value, and it ranges from like 200 to 1,800 all over the map. Mostly hardwood, pole timber, young stands on those old fields. High volume, old pine, saw timber, and everything in the middle. And the question is, what have those produced, right? Not they're worth that much, but what is their growth rate? So you can see on the left axis there's really no pattern here, right? I suspect that there would be, but there isn't. The stands have gone from $10 to $60 an acre per year. That's what they're growing right now. That's not bad, right? The average is 29 if you look at it all, but every stand is different. We had a tour there this past summer. We looked at a bunch of these and explored that. The rate of return, there is quite a pattern here, and you can see the overall average there is about 2.7% on their own value. This is an 8-year return from the beginning and ending value, right? And that's also real, right? That's using deflated stumpage prices. So that's encouraging. All this is, I find, very encouraging, right? Finally, let's look at see if 10 years ago, about right before I retired, I finally decided I got to start teaching students carbon numeracy, I call it, right? You missed it, Jessica. You were a little bit before that. You don't know anything about carbon, but me. No, sorry. So we'd be done, right? I have no more to say. We'd wrap up. But now carbon is both interesting, saleable. We care about it for greenhouse gas emissions, all of that. So we're going to look at the carbon footprint here. So carbon is harder to get your arms around than money and soil timber. It's because you've got two pools of it, right? You're growing carbon, but then when you harvest it, it kind of drains away. Some of it goes to these dead storage pools. It goes to landfills, it goes into durable products. And then temporarily it goes into logging. If you're using anything but a whole tree system, you have some logging slash out there. So that's one carbon pool. And the other one, of course, is the same old pool. It's the living trees you have in your woodlot, right? So again, it's like the harvest plus the growing stock. We need to do the same kind of math here. It's more complicated because I liken it to the fact, it's like, so here's all the carbon. I'm just showing you Ron's period here for just, simplicity that he harvested. Carbon is sort of like, well, when you sell saw logs, you get to keep all the money, right? Do whatever you want with it. It doesn't go away. You can invest it even. It will grow, as we saw. Carbon is more like, an analogy would be a mismanaged endowment fund where you get this principal and the manager just overspends the income off of it and doesn't reinvest the interest. So the principal just drains off over time pretty soon, doesn't support anything. That's the way carbon works, right? And you can't do anything about it, right? When you harvest carbon, it doesn't all go magically into a bunch of 2x4s. Most of it goes somewhere else. So let's just look and see exactly what that looks like. This comes from the FBS model. So the first point is Ron's carbon harvested. Almost 50% of that immediately goes away in emissions and other things in manufacturing / in the woods. And then over time, the models will predict that will just continue to decay out there in the consumer environment and land and the waste stream, right? So that you have to model it. So there's the 78 harvest. There's this 88 harvest, the same way. There's the 98 harvest, and we later will add our harvest. Just it's enough for now. If you add those up, that's the cumulative storage of carbon in these dead pools from Ron's harvest strategy. So you notice the difference between what we cut and what we keep is not the same anymore, right? We're losing the difference here, which is emissions, right? That's some emissions in the sawmill and the pulp mill and everything that just goes away. It outgasses back into the environment. And then once it's in the waste stream, it starts to degrade and respire away. So initially, you can see the numbers are not too bad, 50%. 48%, that's the percentage of the carbon you're cutting that gets stored at a given time. But if you don't keep cutting, which didn't happen here, the growing stock not building up much, you're not adding to this pool, so it's just declining away, right? So by the time you're out here and about when Ron moved off the property, that his footprint was down to 23, only 23% of it, his carbon was still out there somewhere. Most of the rest of it was back in the atmosphere. So there's let's do the same thing we did with the growing stock. There's the actual carbon pre-harvest in the stand. There it is, residual, the residual if you deduct the harvest from it. So that's the carbon stocking over time. Here's the cumulative dead carbon pool over time. So to get the carbon footprint, we add those two, right? Now, the fact that that is positive, a positive slope, there's more stored at the end of that, 50 years in the beginning, a lot more, is, I think, just profoundly good. It's that number right there. You take the original, compare those two, that is 2,245 tons of carbon sequestered permanently in this much in the trees, this much in the debris, right? That's kind of time sensitive. You can see if you extrapolate that, that would be a little different, roughly half in each, right? Even though most of it now is in the woods, the trees. How about that? So that is what? You can annualize that like we did the growth, got the 7/10 of a cord. Here we get about half of that, 0.38 tons, roughly 4/10 of a ton per acre per year over that length of time. That's 800 pounds on every acre, every year for 47 years, right? Just imagine that, right? And that's real. That's out there in the ecosystem, either in the trees or in those landfills or wherever. So that's the story, and I'm just going to review here. So we've grown and harvested 0.68 quarts sustainably. We've harvested $200,000, and I say we, it's Jess and I and Ron. 4,000 a year over 50 years. We've sequestered over 2,000 tons of carbon, 0.38 per year. That's, in any sense, that's a strong positive carbon footprint for forestry. We produced an annual current inventory that's 1.8 times the beginning, with more saw timber and a higher proportion of climate-resistant valuable species that are native, right? That is adaptive silviculture. I got news for you. And this has always been, we didn't call it that in 1968 when Ron started, but this is what it looks like when you do it. And it works. And the stands are now growing $29 an acre per year. That's 3 times what I think industry's getting off their investments in at least a year. I don't know about elsewhere. So it's hard to not think of this as a good news story. And that's why I'm so pleased to be able to report and be a part of the story. Just 50 years of old-fashioned forestry, just saving the good, long-lived, valuable growing stock, has produced a much more valuable forest and a great sustainability record, durable forest, I'm calling it, against climate resilience, while generating, a significant income for the landowners. It's just this old-fashioned cut the word, grow the best, just repeatedly in multiple partial irregular shelterwood harvests. Now, you do need to, you can't just cut wood, right? You can just pick away forever, but you have to manage the regeneration. This is when I was a silviculture, it's about managing 2 things, growing stock and regeneration. If you don't do both of them, you do not have a sustainable system. You can't just do one or the other. So we have devoted quite a bit of effort and attention, as you saw to some degree, in getting rid of that beech and fir and making sure that it's being replaced by what's making us now the money in the overstory, the pine and the sugar maple. And it's working. So in the end here, we've got just ecologically based, naturally based, irregular shelterwood is productive, it's profitable, it's climate resilient, and it's carbon friendly. That's a quadruple bottom line for me. And, it's, while you know, it's hard to, because Jess and I, we're so a part of this. We're obviously very proud to have carried on this legacy. And especially having the skills and the audience and the renown to be able to come and talk to you about it and document it. But if I stand back from this and I just look at this is inspirational. I find it inspirational, and I bet that you guys, as tree farmers, I bet you know many similar cases. They probably aren't as well documented. This is just kind of exceptional. But, if you got the same wood, you inherited value from your parents, a lot from your parents, and you manage it sustainably, and you put your kids to college and all the things you do with a well-managed woodlot, and you still own it, and you're smiling when you go out in it every day. That's a success story. And, this needs to be, I think, much more broadly. I think the landowners like us who play the long game are the good guys. And that story needs to be more broadcast than it has been. Now, thanks for inviting me. I have a YouTube channel that you can go to and find out. There's my email address, and I have to share my credit here with my wonderful partner in all ways, really. She'd be here if she could. And of course, everybody has the best woods dog ever. We really do have the best woods dog ever. And there she is. That's Corey. So, all right. Thank you.